So you think humanity's survival was some kind of grand destiny? Like we're the chosen species in a cosmic plan where everything works out because we're just that special? Yeah, about that. Spoiler alert. We're basically the luckiest idiots in the universe, and our entire existence has been held together by the absolute thinnest thread of dumb luck. Random chance and a few people who happened to be paying attention at exactly the right moment when everything was about to go catastrophically wrong. We've come within inches of complete annihilation so many times that it's honestly shocking we're still here to argue about pizza toppings on Twitter and watch cat videos at 3 in the morning. I'm talking about moments where one wrong move, one miscalculation, one guy having a bad day at work could have ended everything. And I mean everything. Like no more humans, no more civilization, no more anything except maybe cockroaches, and that one Nokia phone that survives every apocalypse scenario. The universe has basically been playing Russian roulette with humanity's existence, and somehow we keep winning, even though we don't even realize we're in the game most of the time. Let's start with one of my personal favorites because it combines the Cold War nuclear weapons and the kind of technological glitch that would make you throw your laptop out the window if it happened during a Zoom meeting. September 26, 1983, and a Soviet officer named Stanislav Petrov is sitting in a bunker doing what sounds like the most stressful job in human history, which is monitoring early warning systems for nuclear attacks from the United States. Now this is during the Cold War, which was basically decades of the US and Soviet Union pointing nuclear weapons at each other like two people in a standoff who both have their fingers on the trigger and are just waiting for literally any excuse to pull it. The tension was so thick you could cut it with a knife, and everyone was paranoid about getting nuked at any second, which sounds exhausting honestly. So Petrov is sitting there probably drinking terrible Soviet coffee and thinking about what he's going to have for dinner when suddenly the alarms start going off and the computer system is screaming that the United States has just launched 5 intercontinental ballistic missiles directly at the Soviet Union. 5 ICBMs, which for context is enough to turn several major cities into radioactive parking lots, and definitely enough to trigger the Soviet Union's automatic retaliation protocol, which would then trigger the US's retaliation, which would then trigger World War III. And the complete annihilation of human civilization as we know it. The protocol was clear, the training was clear, and the computer was very clearly saying that nuclear missiles were currently flying through the air towards Soviet territory, and everyone was about to die unless they immediately launched their own missiles in response. Petrov had minutes, maybe less, to make a decision that would determine whether humanity continued to exist or whether the entire planet became an uninhabitable wasteland where the only survivors would be future archaeologists wondering what the hell happened to that promising species that invented pizza and rock music. And here's where it gets absolutely wild, because Petrov looked at the data, looked at the alarm, looked at his training that told him to immediately report this to his superiors, who would then push the big red button, and he just went, nah, this seems wrong. That's it. That's the whole decision-making process that saved humanity. This man with every system telling him that nuclear war had begun with his training, screaming at him to follow protocol with the fate of the entire world in his hands, just had a gut feeling that something wasn't right and decided to wait it out instead of triggering the apocalypse. Turns out he was correct because it was a computer malfunction caused by sunlight reflecting off clouds that the system mistakenly identified as missile launches, which is the kind of technical error that makes you want to have a very stern conversation with whoever designed that particular piece of software. If Petrov had followed protocol, if he had been a by-the-book kind of guy, if he had just done what he was supposed to do according to every rule and regulation, there's a very real chance that none of us would be here right now. The entire continued existence of human civilization came down to one guy in a bunker saying, this feels off, and choosing to trust his instincts over the computer that was telling him the world was ending. But wait, it gets better, because this isn't even the only time during the Cold War that we almost accidentally ended the world because of a technical glitch or a misunderstanding or just general incompetence. November 9th, 1979, and the National Military Command Center in the United States picks up what appears to be a massive Soviet nuclear strike with over 2,000 warheads heading toward North America, which is the kind of morning that really ruins your breakfast plans. The duty officer sees this, confirms it with NORAD, and suddenly everyone is scrambling to wake up the president and prepare for retaliation. Because clearly the Soviets have decided today is a good day for mutually assured destruction. Fighter jets are scrambled, nuclear bombers are put on alert, and for several absolutely terrifying minutes, the United States is preparing to launch its entire nuclear arsenal in response to what everyone believes is an incoming attack that will kill millions of people and end civilization as we know it. Then someone has the brilliant idea to actually check if there are really missiles in the sky, and surprise, surprise, there aren't any missiles because the entire alert was triggered by someone accidentally loading a training simulation tape into the actual warning system. which is the kind of mistake that makes you question every safety protocol and double-checking procedure that supposedly exists to prevent exactly this kind of thing from happening. Can you imagine being the person who loaded that tape? Just having a normal day at work, putting in what you think is a test simulation, and then finding out that you almost caused World War III and the end of human history because you grabbed the wrong tape from the shelf? That's the kind of mistake that haunts you forever, assuming there's still a world left for you to be haunted in. Let's move away from nuclear near misses for a moment and talk about the time a literal volcano almost ended human civilization before we even had a chance to invent nuclear weapons to threaten ourselves with. Around 74,000 years ago, Mount Toba in Indonesia decided to have the mother of all bad days and erupted with such catastrophic force that it makes every modern natural disaster look like a minor inconvenience in comparison. This wasn't just a volcano erupting. This was a supervolcano going full apocalypse mode and ejecting so much ash and debris into the atmosphere that it blocked out the sun for years, dropped global temperatures by as much as 15 degrees Celsius, and basically turned the entire planet into a frozen hellscape where nothing could grow, and everyone was just trying desperately not to starve to death in the volcanic winter that followed. The eruption was so massive that it left behind a crater that's now a lake approximately 100 kilometers long and 30 kilometers wide, which gives you some sense of just how much material was violently expelled from the Earth in what must have been the most terrifying geological event in human history. Scientists estimate that the human population at the time crashed to somewhere between 3,000 and 10,000 individuals total, which means humanity went through the tightest genetic bottleneck in our entire species history and came within a hair's breadth of just going extinct entirely because a mountain in Indonesia had geological indigestion. Think about that for a second, because it's absolutely wild. There was a moment in our history where the entire human species, everything we would ever become, every city we would build, every symphony we would write, every ridiculous argument we would have on social media about whether a hot dog is a sandwich, all of it came down to maybe 10,000 scared, cold-starving people huddled in whatever caves and shelters they could find, eating whatever they could scavenge, and just barely managing to survive long enough to reproduce and keep the species going. We were functionally extinct. We were on the absolute edge of oblivion. And the only reason we're here now is because those few thousand survivors were stubborn enough or lucky enough or both to make it through the volcanic winter and slowly rebuild the population over thousands of years. Every single person alive today is descended from that tiny group of survivors who made it through the Toba catastrophe, which means we all share this incredibly narrow genetic heritage that nearly didn't exist at all. The entire human story, all of recorded history, all of civilization, everything that makes us who we are as a species almost never happened, because a volcano in Indonesia had a really bad eruption at exactly the wrong time in human development. Now let's talk about the Cuban Missile Crisis, because no discussion of near-extinction events would be complete without mentioning the 13 days in October 1962 when the world came closer to nuclear war than at any other point in history, and I'm including all those Cold War close calls I just mentioned. The Soviet Union had secretly installed nuclear missiles in Cuba, which is about 90 miles from Florida, which meant they could hit most major American cities before anyone even knew the missiles had launched, which the United States was understandably not thrilled about. President Kennedy ordered a naval blockade of Cuba to prevent any more missiles from being delivered. The Soviets said they would ignore the blockade. And suddenly we had two nuclear superpowers in a direct confrontation where neither side wanted to back down, because backing down meant looking weak, and looking weak during the Cold War was apparently worse than potentially ending all human life on Earth. For nearly 2 weeks, the world held its breath while Kennedy and Khrushchev played the most dangerous game of chicken in human history, with nuclear weapons pointed at each other and thousands of missiles ready to launch at a moment's notice if anyone made the wrong move or misinterpreted a signal or just decided that mutual destruction was preferable to appearing to lose face on the international stage. What most people don't know is just how close we actually came to the shooting starting. And I'm not talking about theoretical close calls. I'm talking about actual moments where weapons were armed and fingers were on triggers, and the only thing preventing launch was one person making a different decision. On October 27th, which is now known as Black Saturday because it was the day everything almost went to hell, a Soviet submarine designated B-59 was being harassed by American destroyers in international waters near Cuba. And the submarine's captain and political officer wanted to launch a nuclear torpedo at the American ships because they thought World War III had already started and they were just doing their part. Soviet submarines carried nuclear torpedoes, which seems like an absolutely insane thing to give to submarine commanders with limited communication to Moscow. And the protocol for launching required agreement from the captain, the political officer, and the second captain. 2 out of 3 were ready to launch, ready to fire a nuclear weapon at American ships, which would have immediately triggered a massive response and spiraled into full nuclear war. The second captain, a guy named Vasily Arkhipov, was the only one who said no, who refused to authorize the launch, who somehow kept his cool while being depth charged by American destroyers in the middle of an international crisis, and convinced the others that maybe launching a nuclear weapon wasn't the best idea. Vasily Arkhipov, a name most people have never heard, literally prevented World War III by being the one voice of reason in a submarine that was hot, cramped, low on oxygen, and under attack. If he had agreed with the other 2 officers, if he had been sick that day and someone else had been second captain, if he had just been in a worse mood and decided to go along with the others, we wouldn't be here having this conversation because civilization would have ended in 1962. Let's switch gears and talk about something that sounds like a bad science fiction movie but is actually a real thing that almost happened, and that's the time we nearly gave ourselves a pandemic that would have made COVID look like a mild case of the sniffles. In 1977, the H1N1 influenza virus mysteriously reappeared and started spreading around the world, which was weird because that particular strain had been extinct in humans since the 1950s and shouldn't have existed anymore outside of laboratory freezers where scientists keep dangerous viruses for research purposes. Turns out, and this is where it gets concerning, the virus almost certainly escaped from a laboratory, probably in China or the Soviet Union, where someone was working with frozen samples and either had an accident or just wasn't following proper safety protocols. The 1977 flu pandemic, as it's called, was relatively mild and mostly affected younger people who hadn't been exposed to H1N1 before. But it was essentially a warning shot from the universe about what happens when we play around with dangerous pathogens and don't maintain perfect laboratory security at all times. We got incredibly lucky that the escaped virus was a relatively mild strain and that many older people had immunity from previous exposure. But it could have been so much worse if the escaped pathogen had been something more lethal or more transmissible or both. The thing that keeps virologists and epidemiologists up at night is the knowledge that there are laboratories around the world storing and studying some of the deadliest pathogens in human history. Things like smallpox and Ebola and engineered flu strains that could kill millions if they ever got out. And all it takes is one accident, one moment of carelessness, one disgruntled employee, or one natural disaster damaging containment. And suddenly, we're dealing with an outbreak of something that makes every historical pandemic look tame by comparison. We've built these incredible repositories of the most dangerous biological agents on Earth. We've studied them and modified them and created new variants in the name of research and biodefense, and we're trusting that human error and equipment failure and natural disasters will never combine in just the wrong way to release something catastrophic. It's the biological equivalent of keeping loaded guns in every room and just trusting that nobody will ever accidentally pull a trigger. Except instead of guns, we're talking about microscopic organisms that can replicate exponentially and spread around the world before anyone even realizes there's a problem. Then there's the Carrington event of 1859, which was the largest geomagnetic storm in recorded history and which absolutely fried telegraph systems across Europe and North America, causing fires and giving operators electric shocks and generally demonstrating what happens when the sun decides to burp a massive amount of electromagnetic radiation directly at Earth. Now, in 1859, this was mostly just an inconvenience because the only electrical infrastructure we had was telegraph lines. So the damage was limited to some fires and some broken equipment and some very confused telegraph operators who suddenly couldn't send messages anymore. But if a Carrington-level event happened today, in our hyper-connected, electricity-dependent, everything runs on computers modern world, it would be absolutely catastrophic in ways that are hard to even fully comprehend. We're talking about power grids failing across entire continents, transformers burning out and taking months or years to replace satellites being damaged or destroyed, communication systems going offline. Anything with a microchip potentially getting fried, and basically all of modern civilization grinding to a halt because we can't function without electricity and electronics anymore. No power means no water pumping, no food refrigeration, no hospitals operating, no transportation, no communication, no internet, no nothing. And we'd be thrown back to essentially pre-industrial conditions overnight. Except we don't have the infrastructure or knowledge to survive at pre-industrial technology levels, because we've built our entire society around the assumption that electricity will always be available. The terrifying part is that Carrington-level events aren't even that rare on cosmic timescales. They happen roughly once every century or so, which means we're actually overdue for another one, and it's not a question of if but when the next big solar storm is going to hit us. In 2012, a Carrington-class coronal mass ejection did occur. It just happened to miss Earth by about 9 days because we had already moved past that point in our orbit, which is the kind of near miss that nobody talks about, but which could have sent us back to the 1800s technologically if our timing had been just slightly different. We came within a week of potentially losing all our satellites, all our power grids, all our electronic infrastructure, all the technology that makes modern life possible, and most people don't even know it happened because it missed us and therefore wasn't a problem. But it's a reminder that we're one bad solar storm away from losing everything we've built, and unlike nuclear war or pandemics where we at least have some control over the outcome. There's basically nothing we can do to prevent a massive solar storm except hope that it doesn't happen and try to build some resilience into our systems, which we're not really doing because spending billions of dollars to harden infrastructure against a threat that might not happen for decades isn't politically popular. So here we are, humanity, the species that thinks it's conquered nature and mastered the planet and secured its future, when in reality we're just stumbling through history, getting lucky over and over again while various existential threats line up to take shots at us. We've survived nuclear near misses through sheer dumb luck, and a few clear-headed individuals we've survived volcanic eruptions that nearly made us extinct. We've survived close calls with pandemics and solar storms and probably dozens of other near disasters that we don't even know about, because they were averted before anyone realized how close we came to the end. The universe has given us so many chances to die out, so many opportunities to fail, so many moments where everything could have gone wrong, and somehow we're still here, still arguing about nonsense on the internet, still making the same mistakes, still building new ways to potentially destroy ourselves while barely acknowledging the ways we've almost destroyed ourselves in the past. The conclusion you should draw from all this isn't that we're doomed, although we might be, but rather that our survival as a species has been way more precarious and way more dependent on random chance than any of us want to admit. We like to think we're in control, that we've got everything figured out, that human ingenuity and technology will save us from any threat. But the reality is that we've been saved over and over again by luck, by individual decisions made in moments of crisis, by disasters that missed us by days or miles, by technological failures that happened to be noticed before they caused catastrophe. So maybe, just maybe, we should be a bit more humble about our place in the universe and a bit more careful about the various ways we're currently threatening our own existence, whether through climate change or nuclear weapons or gain-of-function research or whatever other creative methods we're developing to potentially end ourselves. Or we can just keep scrolling through social media and pretend that nothing bad could ever happen to us because we're humans and we're special, and surely our plot armor is thick enough to survive anything. Your choice, really, but history suggests that betting on our continued luck might not be the smartest strategy. Anyway, if you enjoyed learning about all the ways we almost died, hit that like button and subscribe, because apparently we're still here to make YouTube videos about our near-extinction experiences, which is either inspiring or deeply concerning depending on your perspective. And drop a comment telling me which near disaster you think was the closest call, or which potential future disaster keeps you up at night. Because misery loves company, and we might as well acknowledge our collective fragility together.